The prevention of radicalization in the prison system was a 13-month initiative of the Budapest Center for Mass Atrocities Prevention in collaboration with Hungarian experts and researchers. Founded by the Internal Security Fund of the European Union, it aimed at contributing to the coordination and improvement of national and international capabilities for preventing and countering radicalization. To that end, it mapped the capabilities of Hungarian prisons to recognize signs of radicalization, as well as to manage and prevent processes leading to radicalization. It provided trainings for prison personnel to further improve such capabilities and conduct so-called life path interviews with prisoners to facilitate their rehabilitation and reintegration. The results of the projects and its policy recommendations are summarized in a report, both in Hungarian and English, that was presented in a conference in 2018. Radicalization and extremism is an increasingly prominent on the security agenda. It is of high priority for national and international stakeholders to improve relevant capabilities and coordinate efforts for preventing these negative trends. Vulnerable social groups, in particular those with criminal records, are especially susceptible to radicalization and recruitment by extremist organizations. To prevent such negative trends, it is imperative to identify, monitor, and evaluate risk on a continuous basis, engaging with potentially vulnerable people in an adequate manner, and facilitate the rehabilitation and reintegration of prisoners into society, and design exit options for extremist movements for those that have already been recruited. Radicalization and extremism is a new security challenge in Hungary. Therefore, the preparedness of prison personnel to respond to such challenges and the precise needs in terms of capabilities development are yet to be adequately explored. Although the successful preventive efforts, it is imperative to identify and evaluate current needs. It also is important to develop innovative capabilities that can effectively deal with the new challenges and to test the utility and efficacy of relevant training activities. By doing so, improvements in preventive capabilities can be accelerated and expanded. The main objective of the project was to improve and develop the capabilities of Hungarian prison personnel to prevent radicalization.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is George Tatár from the Budapest Center for Mass Atrocities Prevention, and I am very happy that we can welcome you in our small circle. My special welcome goes also to the Deputy Ambassador of the Embassy of France, who has also took the courage and willingness and readiness to join us today. I also welcome the people from various institutions and organizations. Let me not highlight anybody. I will present in some minutes the welcome panel participants. But first of all, let me put you in the political context of this whole event and of this whole project what we do. I think, and I want to underline that prevention of radicalization and extreme violence is a very timely topic today, and in particular in Europe. The process of polarization is one of the fundamental processes in the international arena, which in my view is not sufficient attention has been paid to. And let us think just about some ongoing conflict, the ideological conflict of the various parties of the pro-globalization versus anti-globalization, Democrats versus demophobes, liberal Democrats versus autocrats, populists versus elites, nationalists versus liberals, supranationalists versus nationalists. Those who wish to have more Europe versus those who wish less Europe. Those who are anti-migrants and those who support migration. Those who are for exclusion and those who are for inclusion. So these are very, very serious conflicts which generate public discourse and lead to long-term disputes. Of course, we think that these long-term disputes do help a lot to clear the needs and interests behind these stances and positions and to find long-term solutions for the conflicts. But the precondition of this positive outcome is that the discourse focuses on concrete issues and topics and as well as on situations. If this discourse is about and focused on the identity of the so-called others and is labeling the others, then this process might become dangerous, that divides societies on identity basis and helps its polarization and damages its cohesion, which is a fundamental precondition of the development of a society. I don't want to go into details because our keynote speaker, Dr. Sergei Argalus Augustin Ardelia, will have a keynote speech where the polarization will be touched upon, and let me welcome you. He arrived from Croatia, but I will present him in more detailed manner. So we think that this polarization is very important from the point of view of the process of radicalization. Once we are able to halt the process of radicalization at this stage of polarization, then we have made a very important step forward to halt and to prevent radicalization and extremism and mass atrocities, what the Budapest Center is fighting against. Today, actually, we tried to put in this context this discussion, which is a discussion and the share of best practices among scientists and scholars and practitioners. And in the first panel, we would like to address this issue, the radicalization, the issue of polarization and prevention from various aspects. And the second panel shall be dedicated to the issues of best practices in the field of capacity building, which is more or less focused, will be focused on the prison systems to increase and improve the capabilities also in Hungary and also in other countries. I would like now to first of all to wish all of us, a pleasant morning session and a pleasant exchange of views. Please feel free to express your views, to express your ideas, and let me right now go to the very first panel, to the panel of the welcome speeches, where I would like to give the floor to Ferenc Kaiser, who will, on behalf of the University of Public Service, welcome us, and I would like to also thank the University of Public Service, Colonel István Resberger and his assistants, Christina Csányi, for hosting us, for helping us organize this event. And I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kaiser. Please take the floor.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So when I thinking about this workshop or conference, I think the main question, how we live together in Europe. You know, it was easy to define Europe in the medieval times. Europe surrounded other religion than Christianity. But now, there's nearly 40 million Muslims live inside Europe. 99% of them peaceful. Maybe 1% is, how to say, have the chance to commit something, and they are follow radical ideas. But the other side, not only Muslim follows radical ideas. So the other side, there are much broader extreme right-wing thinking people living in Europe. So the main question, how we live together without maybe serious conflicts in a very open way. You know, in the era of globalization, the information, the people, the goods travel inside Europe freely. Thanks to the World Wide Web, radical ideas, radical technologies, radical methods, how to commit terrorist attacks. So very easily you can access to proper information how to commit terrorist attack, how to maybe organize an army, how to organize a terrorist group. So it is a very hard question. I think the last few years it reveals a very different way. You know, in the era of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden didn't really trust the web. But now the situation is quite different. Radical organization, especially the ISIS, revealed how good to use the web, how good, how effective to ask support, manpower, money, and other useful logistic elements to a terrorist organization. So I think maybe the greatest task for a government or a non-governmental organization to fight against the radicalization, how to block the dark side of the web.
Thank you very much. Let me right now introduce Mr. Mihály Somogyvári from the Hungarian Prison Authority, National Authority, and we have worked together with the National Prison Authority very closely in implementing our project, and I would like also to thank for your cooperation. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Mihály Somogyvári, and I represent the Hungarian Prison Service headquarters. I would like to welcome everybody in this great and very interesting workshop. First of all, as mentioned, the radicalization in prisons has been a quite hot topic recently. However, radicalization, fortunately, is not a burning issue in the Hungarian prison service, at least not yet. What we face in Hungary right now is a little bit different situation than in Western Europe. Just some numbers or some facts. The number of foreign citizens in the Hungarian prison service it's around 4%. So we are talking around 800 people out of 18,000. Moreover, most of the foreign citizens come from neighboring countries. The 60% of the foreign citizens come from Serbia, Ukraine, Romania, and just a little bit more than 100 inmates coming from Islamic background countries. And I would like to highlight that, as far as we know, none of these inmates, foreign fighters or returnees from potentially hazardous countries, as far as you know. I also have to add that the number of those inmates who committed terrorism-related or hate crimes is very low as well. It seems to be a manageable problem and a manageable number, at least now, but we know that it will not always be this way. but even Islamic or any kind of radicalization has not been present in the Hungarian prisons so far, we have to pay attention. And naturally, we are very open to learn from international and domestic good practices. But our focus right now is getting prepared and developing a useful prevention framework. So this is our main goal now. In this process, it's very important to build cooperations between public bodies, law enforcement organizations, research institutes, and other professionals, and sharing of information, experiences related to the radicalization issues. This so-called multi-agency approach, it's not just theoretical expectation, but I believe it's the interest of the stakeholders' concerns. Of course, we pay attention to Muslim inmates regarding the placement, food, religious rights, activities, and other. And it's very important that linked to this task we are counting on other participants. For example, we have a strong and reliable cooperation with the Hungarian Islamic community as well. And of course, we are counting on the help and the cooperation with NGOs. Such as the Budapest Center of Mass Atrocities Prevention, and as mentioned, we have already worked together on a project called Prevention of Radicalization in the Hungarian prison system, which project is the basis of this event after all, and which operated in 5 prisons and involved 50 staff members. I'm sure we can learn a lot from this project, and I think it shall provide assistance to us, to the organization itself, and the colleagues, participant colleagues too. And they can use their knowledge, this experience, the daily work, and help us to creating our own prevention framework, a useful prevention framework. And I hope we have the chance to discuss the results of your research, and I hope we have the opportunity to cooperate other similar projects as well. And I'd like to thank you for your invitation on behalf of the Hungarian Prison Service and of course myself. And again, thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very useful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the support, for your welcome words. And we also do hope that we shall continue this cooperation. And right now, let me introduce Enika Csontos from the EU delegation in Budapest. She is the head of political section at the delegation. I don't think I should hide the secret that she used to be a member of the Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where we have known each other from. And she has worked in Brussels in the DG Home and Justice Affairs. So she right now makes her service here in Budapest, supporting the relations between Hungary and the institutions of the European Union, in particular the European Commission. And let me right now give the floor to Enika, please.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you mind if I remain seated, if it's possible. Thank you very much for inviting the representation of the European Commission here in Hungary to say a few welcoming words on this very important topic. And as Mr. Tatar said, I had the pleasure to work in DG Migration and Home Affairs until recently, which you probably know inside the Commission bureaucracy is the Director General, which is in charge of fight against terrorism and radicalization when it comes to internal security. Of course, regarding the external dimension, so working with other countries, we closely cooperate with the European External Action Service. The terrorist threat to the European Union remains high, and it is difficult to see this diminishing anytime soon. As you might know, the recently published EU Terrorism Situation and Trend 2018 report, the so-called TSAT report by Europol, shows in 2017, 68 innocent victims lost their lives, as a result of terrorist attacks in the EU. Even though the number of casualties decreased last year, the number of attacks did not. In fact, the number of jihadist-inspired attacks more than doubled. Regular Eurobarometer surveys show that fighting terrorism and radicalization is one of the most important concerns of European citizens when it comes to challenges faced by the EU. The European Commission therefore firmly believes in eradicating terrorism at its source. The root of the problem, in our view, is the existence of radical extremist political ideology, and we should be clear to distinguish it from religion. Addressing and stopping radicalization and recruitment is a priority for the Commission and the EU, as also outlined in the EU internal security strategy. As already was said before me, radicalization can take many forms and nobody has a monopoly on it, whether it is Islamist extremists or right-wing extremists or others. Most of the recent attacks, in fact, within the EU were carried out by homegrown extremists who had never traveled to so-called jihadist theaters. And there are many reasons why people turn to extremist groups and choose violence, and there is no one silver bullet solution. The response needs to come from all levels, national and local. Teachers, social services, prison staff, local communities can do a lot to prevent spreading the poison of radicalization. So what can the EU do? The EU can and is helping, and in fact can basically do two important things. First of all, step in where an EU-wide response can be effective. And the other is to mobilize the practitioners, mobilize exchanges of best practices and ideas, and also mobilize funds. As you can see also on the screen, we have, for example, the Home Affairs funds, which belong to DG Home, which also have this workshop. So basically something this conference today is about. Let me give a few points on what the Commission and the EU has been doing in recent months. I'm sure you are aware that last July the Commission set up a high-level expert group on radicalization in order to better assist it in identifying ways to improve our prevention efforts at the EU level. This group gathered all relevant stakeholders, so member states, EU institutions, relevant European agencies and organizations. Its goal was to coordinate and to create stronger links between the main actors, so policymakers, practitioners and researchers, also industry stakeholders, as well as between different initiatives and networks. The group presented its final report on the 18th of May this year, so not so long ago. And the report includes a broad range of recommendations for concrete actions to address challenges in priority areas such as radicalization in prisons, including follow-up after release and the management of sentences, communication and online propaganda, multi-stakeholder cooperation at local level, education and social inclusion, supporting to groups which require particular attention, as well as the external dimension. Our radicalization awareness network was actively involved in the work of the high-level expert group and continues to work at pace across the EU. And I'm sure you will hear about the radicalization awareness network more in detail later on. So let me come and say a few words on prison radicalization, which will be in the focus of your workshop today. In fact, prison radicalization remains a very real problem for the EU, as indicated by the number of attackers who had previously been imprisoned. The Commission therefore has decided to redirect some of our funding under the Justice Programme to preventing radicalization in prisons. At present, we are funding 19 projects covering the development of risk assessment methodologies, promoting alternatives to detention, exploring the role of probation, and supporting the training of judges, prosecutors, and prison and probation staff at EU level. And we already have some promising results, such as a strengthened juvenile justice system in several member states, or an early warning system to detect and prevent extremist deviations among inmates. However, the Commission believes that we need to invest significantly in de-radicalization, disengagement and rehabilitation programs, as it was also stressed by the report of the high-level group. We also need tools to identify the different profiles in order to be able to provide the most appropriate criminal justice response. Prison and probation staff should be also adequately trained to carry out their work efficiently and humanly. Finally, whilst we have a tendency to focus on so-called jihadi radicalization, we cannot afford to overlook or play down the increasingly worrying rise of other forms of violent extremism, particularly that of the far right. Our failure to address all forms of violent extremism will only result in increased alienation and marginalization, which terrorist groups will continue to exploit to their advantage. We must therefore ensure a zero-tolerance approach to all forms of violent extremism, and in doing so, deprive the violent extremists of some of the ammunition that they exploit to prey on the vulnerable and groom them. At a time when the world seems to be becoming even more insular, we must redouble our efforts to prevent further polarization within our communities. And finally, I would like to quote Commissioner Jourova, if I may. This work is also about our shared values. We have to get collectively better at being proud and telling attractive stories, what makes Europe one of the best places to live on the planet. Democracy, respect for the rule of law, equality before the law, and respect for minorities are all part of the European identity. And with these nice words, I would like to wish you a very fruitful discussion for today. Thank you very much.
Let me invite now the keynote speaker of our session, of our event, Mr. Sergei Augustin Erdelyan, coming from Croatia, but who has been delegated to participate in our event by the Radicalization Awareness Network, which plays a very important role in Europe to prevent radicalization, to share best practices, to generate political will at various in various sectors of the society. And let me say a few words about Sergei Augustin, who used to be and who is a social worker in the Institute for Social Health Protection. He used to be a social worker in a correctional institution for juvenile offenders. Then later on he became the director of this correctional institution, and since 2012 is the director of the social care center in Croatia. He will have at this stage a keynote speech, and and his hat is now at the Radicalization Awareness Network. And then in the first panel he will be also invited to share some best practices with us on the so-called multi-agency approach, but let's speak about it later on. Sergei Augustin, thank you very much. You have accepted our invitation, and the floor is yours.
I will share with you some information about the main findings of the program. The program entitled Prevention of Radicalization in the Hungarian Prison System. And just in the beginning, to clarify a few things, I won't talk about Muslims, imams, I won't talk about Muslim terrorism, I won't talk about jihad, I won't talk about these issues. Thanks to the Mihai, maybe it was you, Mihai, who presented the
Yes.
as he informed you, in the Hungarian detention centers there are no really prisoners with foreign backgrounds and not really Muslim inmates. So I think in our case, I mean in case of Hungary, this is not the hot potato. I will talk about Hungarian prisoners, and I will talk about the situation where they live, and I will talk about the circumstances where they're coming from, so things like that. Yeah, this is my presentation. It seems to be a little bit difficult, but believe me, it's easy going and it's quite simple. Just in the beginning, a few sentences about the methodology, about the background. We were there in altogether 5 detention centers, as you mentioned. And regarding the research methods, we organized focus groups for prison staff. And we organized altogether 15 days of trainings also for prison staff, and we conducted 15 interviews with prisoners. So this is the input, let's say. And we started to work last September, and the last interviews were conducted in May, so a few weeks ago. So it's quite, let's say, an up-to-date research program. And what is the structure of my presentation? In the beginning, I will tell you, I will share with you information about the findings of the focus groups, and after that, I will talk about the findings or experiences of the interviews, and then in the end, I will talk about the trainings. And at the end, we will have time to discuss it.
Yeah.
All right. So, it's not a very beautiful figure, but still, maybe not the beautiness is the most important thing. Because as I mentioned, we conducted interviews, and we were interested in the conflicts or the debates or the tension that arise between formal and informal groups of the detention centers. So we were a little bit interested in polarization, what you, Sergey, mentioned. So the groups, the us and the them groups. And this is a quite comprehensive list. According to the prison staff, these are the groups that can be described as being involved in various conflicts. I will not read all of them because maybe it's too, I don't have really time, but I would like to point at the conflicts that arise due to different identities. It's so good, and thanks for the introduction, because I do not have to tell very boring sentences, I mean from my side, and repeat that there are groups and there are us and them and different identities and polarization. So you have done this, thank you very much for the introduction. Because we think or we believe that from the point of view of the process of radicalization and polarization, these groups should be taken into consideration. I would like to highlight the conflicts between the Roma and non-Roma inmates, and I would like to emphasize the conflicts between the so-called Nazi prisoners and the Roma prisoners. So the aim of this kind of, let's say, mapping was to identify the detention centers, I mean the 5 detention centers where we conducted the research program, and we just wanted to understand that what are the groups that are involved in these kind of conflicts. So this was the first stage. The second stage, sorry, it was the third stage, but I will talk about the findings of this stage now. The 15 interviews, these were live main interviews. It means that, of course, we had an interview guideline and we asked questions, but this kind of method is rather about giving the freedom to the interviewee. I mean, we asked questions about their childhood, about their memories. So we were interested in, let's say, the beginning. And we just gave the floor to them. We asked the question, for example, tell us some stories about your childhood, and sometimes it took 2 hours and they were talking and talking and talking and talking. So this is not a very structured method. It's quite a, let's say, free qualitative method. And now I would like to talk about the findings of or experiences of these interviews. As I mentioned, in case of the focus group, thanks to the focus groups, we were able to identify various groups. As a result of the interviews, we were able to identify other kind of groups. So let's see what are these kind of groups. First of all, the groups that can be entitled as radicalized. So the prisoners or the inmates who, from a specific point of view, according to the prison staff and according to our opinion, are more or less radicalized. And here I would like to one more time highlight the presentation that were held by you, Sergey, that for us radicalization and polarization is not so far from each other. As you mentioned, I agree with you, it's a process. So before radicalization, as a preliminary step or preliminary stage, there could be or might be polarization. And I use the definitions that we use. I mean, radicalization awareness network. So I talking for me, polarization is the same, that there are these us and them groups, and the people who belong to this group have negative attitudes and those towards the other groups. So it's very same. So the first group of the prisoners are the ones who can be described as radicalized or polarized. And now I will give you information about these people, about these inmates. So what are the characteristics of these prisoners? First of all, negative personal experience before prison towards specific minority groups, especially the Roma. So we heard a lot of very sad and strange and sometimes frightening stories about from the childhood of our interviewees. I mean, when we conducted our interviews, you know, they are very big guys, very big men, muscle, things tattoo. But these stories, you know, they go back to the childhood of these big guys, when these big guys were quite small, I mean kids. And that time, you know, they or their families had a lot of conflicts with Roma neighbors, with Roma people, with Roma criminals, and we heard a lot of stories about clashes and oppositions and things like that. So this is quite, I think, an important characteristic of this target group. Another important characteristic is a very strong sense of national identity. We heard one more time a lot of strange, sad, and frightening stories about the past. I mean, we heard a lot of stories about the past of the families of our interviewees. You know, from the 50s, from the 90s, from the 60s. And our interviewees had a really clear impression about the harms that were caused by the Soviet army, by the secret police, by the Hungarian secret police, by the Communist or Socialist Party and the institutions and the people who belong to this system. And partly, I think, maybe we can understand that this is the reason that these people represent conservative traditionalist system of values, and they do not really belong to the left, or they do not really accept the liberalist values, let's say. And further characteristic of these people: authority, hierarchy, loyalty to values, and order. Are you still here? Okay, can you follow?
Yes.
So what is the additional characteristics of this group? Isolation and loneliness within the child peer group. I wouldn't say it's characteristic of the whole group, but quite a lot of people who belong to this group can be described as this. So this is one of the, let's say, paths that leads to the prison. Maybe now you can understand why I'm talking about this issue, because we wanted to understand what are the circumstances, what are the environments, what are the factors that push the people onto the path that leads to the prison. So we were interested in the risk factors that increase the likelihood of being in prison. And this is a typical path. This is a typical road or way, let's say. And we managed to identify another typical way, and this is about opposition. So the prisoners who belong to this group, they are a lot of times segregated, discriminated. There is a distance from the mainstream, and they oppose the system. And what does it mean, system? Everything. I mean, microenvironment, family, neighbors, institutions as the police, but even the norms, the prevailing norms, the law, rule of following life path, so everything that belongs to the, let's say, the mainstream. And now I would like to give you information about these groups. So what are the characteristics of the people, I mean of the inmates, who belong to this group? Emotional and family related reasons. According to our interviewees, their families were not really able to support them, and not only lack of support, but retribution, retaliation, neglect, and here is a kind of list. Lack of emotional ties, emotional physical abuse, humiliation, vulnerability, things like that. So as you can recognize, the families of these people were a little bit difficult, let's say. another characteristic, the role of the same age peer group, that was very, very, very important. So they really wanted to belong somewhere. They really wanted to belong a group. An additional characteristic, disadvantaged background. So these prisoners, inmates, one more time, the big ones, who used to be small ones, used to be kids, no? They lived really in deep poverty. I mean deep poverty, not poverty, deep poverty. Deviant behavior, norm-breaking acts, violence, things like that. So these kind of attitudes and behavior were not only endorsed, but sometimes even supported by their family or by their micro-community. And one more important characteristic, individual motivation. So the question, how can one enable himself to get out of the subordinate position? How to get out? You know, power and resources. So resources, it means money. Power, it means muscle. I don't really have muscles, but they have. So this is also a tool to get out. So according to our observation, this is another way that leads or goes or results in the prison. And now here we are. I mean, these people, let's say, arrived at the prison, and our research program was really interested in the circumstances or the factors that can intensify the risk of being radicalized. So the next stage, what is inside the prison? Can you read it or not really? The blue, sorry, I have to move, I come out. Okay, you can. So what are the factors that intensify the risk of radicalization of inmates? Forced coexistence of different groups inside the prison. That situation fuels further hatred, intensified conflicts. I mean, this is prison, we know. I mean, you cannot go out, there are prison cells, so this is the situation, we know. However, if the prison staff is not able to recognize these kind of conflicts, for example, between the Roma and the non-Roma, in this case, problems are really there. And I really hope and I really think, and that this is, yeah, I really believe that our prison staff, I mean in Hungary, would like to react as soon as possible. And quite often they manage to do that. Another factor that intensified the conflicts and thereby the risk of radicalization, tightening prison conditions, especially the ones related to communication with family members. I don't know whether you know or not, but we have some new regulations, and according to these regulations, for example, the physical contact with the family is not really not possible. I mean, when the family visit the inmates, there is a wall, a plexi wall, so they cannot touch each other. So this is our expression that this kind of how to say condition just fuels or intensify the conflicts within the prison system, in the detention center. Another condition that should be mentioned, the limited phone contact and the unequal access based on economic status due to the high minute charges. It's also quite a new, let's say, decision that when the prisoners would like to make a call, the minute charges are quite high. So the rich ones can, okay, whatever everybody's, and most of you say, yes, I know, so I will not detail. Factors that intensify the conflicts, we are still there. Lack of information about radicalization, although thanks to our very effective and beautiful program, this kind of problem is not so problematic nowadays, as within the framework of the training, about 40 colleagues, yeah, from the prison staff took part. So I think at least these people have increased knowledge about radicalization and the process of radicalization, but still not only 40 people works in the prison, in the detention center. Attitudes towards the convicts, and here I would like to, just a citation from our study. In our experience, many among the training participants are especially accepting and supportive towards the convicts. At the same time, resentment and opposition towards them can also be described as typical. which makes the establishment of dialogue much more difficult. So it would be crucial from the point of view of preventing radicalization. And additional circumstance that also, according to our opinion, intensify the conflicts, heavy work burden. It's so funny that we are talking about radicalization and we are talking about jihadis and Muslim, things like that, or let's say we are talking about the working conditions of the prison staff. Still, I really believe that these two issues are strongly connected to each other. So heavy work burden, and one more time citation: when tired or exhausted, prison officers can pay less attention to the conflicts emerging among them, and the process of polarization that might already have started to escalate. The heavy workload will have consequences, making the execution of work by the prison staff in an efficient manner more difficult, and as a consequence, making the recognition of the phenomena related to radicalization and polarization more difficult. And this is our impression. And last but not least, and I would like to emphasize that this is not typical. My last slide from this issue. I mean, it's not typical, but still it should be mentioned. And now I'm talking about the radicalization of the prison staff, not the prisoners, not the inmates, but the prison staff. And let me read you one of the citations. We conducted interviews with the prison staff as well. And I think it's much easier, let's say easier, but it makes clear if I read this citation than to tell a lot of very, very clever and interesting sentences about this issue. So here is the citation. One of the prison staff told us, "For me, the focus is not on how prison inmates are becoming radicalized, because inmates are interested in whether there is toilet paper in the toilet or not. The focus more for me is how I and we as prison staff are becoming radicalized by the inhuman system, and under these inhuman conditions we need to work each day. This punitive system hardens the life of inmates day by day, that makes our work to become like a battlefield each day. And this constant tension and fights makes me and us more and more radical each day." Okay. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, I will talk, I will need 20 minutes, so I will have 1 more minute. As I mentioned, our program were based on various stages, focus groups, trainings, and interviews. At the end, we not only tried, but we did. We summarized our most important findings, and we tried to find some information about. Sorry, I don't know what's happened. Yeah, I was looking for this one. So we were looking for solutions, and there is. I think these are just the most important messages of us, and recommendations. Of course, the study is a little bit longer, but still, as you can recognize, these recommendations focus on the working conditions and the prison staff, and only a few of them focus on the prisoners and the inmates. I think this is one of our most important message, that if you talk about radicalization, and if you would like to solve some of this issue, you should focus not only on the inmates, but even on the institution, and even on the prison staff as well. I promised 20 minutes, and now we are at 20 minutes, so I will not read this one. And maybe this is the time for making an advertisement or things like that. The study will be available for you. So outside, okay. Okay. So you will be able to read these recommendations. And now I just say thank you very much. We work in close cooperation with Budapest Center. I mean, we, it means the 4C Research Group, so this is the reason why or the website or email address is available. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to the beautiful city of Budapest and Hungary. I am here on behalf of Radicalization Awareness Network, which is a network established by the European Commission in 2012. As the name of the Radicalization Awareness Network said for itself, we are basically established to raise awareness among practitioners and other public features about radicalization. Our main goal is to prevention and countering violent extremism. Besides radicalization, we also tackle polarization as a fertile ground on which radicalization arises. Our network, the Radicalization Awareness Network, is consisted from 9 working groups, and we also have a Center of Excellence. So we are working under DG Home, so our main stakeholder is European Commission. Here today we talk about polarization, which is a growing issue in all of the, especially in European countries. We don't have that many problems with jihadism and other forms of violent extremism and radicalization in Eastern Europe, as it could be found on the western part of the European Union. But the problem is that we must speak about polarization, which is present also in this part of the world. Polarization as itself is not something which is visible. It is not something that we can touch, and not something we can see. But it does mean it is not present in all of our societies. Polarization is basically dividing the people into us and them. Polarization should be tackled in a difficult way, in a different way. One of the best things is to empower this silent middle, empower of society at home, and this is the main issue that Radicalization Awareness Network is doing. On this civil empowerment, we use all NGOs, different political organizations, public services, and so on. If we give strength to the middle, give strength to this silent majority of the people, then we should avoid this extremists from both sides, from every side, to take this middle into their account. This way we suppressed the polarization in our society, and at our opinion it is the best way.
So I was very happy to present about the educational programs of the Tom Lantos Institute, which all aim to fight radicalization and anti-Jewish, anti-Roman sentiments in Hungary. I was talking about 2 of our programs within the Jewish Life and Anti-Semitism program, a theatrical and an artistic educational program, all aimed at developing and allowing space for critical thinking in an informal educational project. And I was also describing our teacher training program within the Roma Rights and Citizenship initiative, which gives tools to teachers all over Hungary to also teach the same approaches and principles that we would like to disseminate. So thank you very much.